Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bill Oglesby, an associate professor at VCU's Robertson School of Media and Culture, and I'd like to welcome to our VCU student debate in advance of next week's presidential election, pitting incumbent Republican Donald Trump against Democratic challenger Joe Biden. So welcome to all of you. This debate was designed as a civil exchange of ideas between citizens who disagree about a wide range of issues. Our students here have an opportunity to show their fellow citizens that Americans with conflicting views in this difficult time can still engage each other with civility. To our knowledge, this is the first such VCU event in which for the next hour or so, leaders of both student and major party groups engage in a formal debate about the issues during an election campaign. This debate is hosted by the VCU Department of Political Science at Robertson School. This is part of an education initiative through Dean Jennifer Mallett at the VCU College of Humanities and Sciences. You can find out more information about this initiative at the following website. The URL is chs.vcu, CHS meaning College of Humanities and Sciences, so chs.vcu.edu/election-2020. Special thanks to Dean Mallett, as well as others in the Dean's office, including Tyler Conrad, Jen Ellswick, and Caitlin Hanberry. I would also like to thank Dr. Jason Ross Arnold, the chair of the Political Science Department at VCU, and Robertson School Director, Dr. Marcus Mesner. Our student debaters this evening are representing the VCU Young Democrats, Haley Lease, Atusa Hagani, and T. Jenkins. And representing the VCU College Republicans are Kerry Flynn, Isaiah Hicks, and Josh Hart. We will start off by giving each side 2 minutes for an opening statement. I will then pose questions on a number of pre-selected issues. Each side will choose one student to respond to the question for up to 2 minutes, and we will alternate the order of the questions. Then, if the students wish, they can respond for up to 1 minute per side, and finally for 30 seconds if the responses go on that long, not necessary if they don't. Those of you watching at home also have an opportunity to pose questions by typing in your queries. Just click on the questions button at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll take that up in the next segment, and we'll close with a 2-minute closing statement by each side. So let's get started now with our opening statement from the Young Democrats.
All right, well, hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Atusa Hagani, and I am the president of VCU Young Dems. I appreciate everyone taking the time out of their nights, their very busy schedules, I'm sure, to indulging in a conversation across party lines, one between Democrats and Republicans. We are going to be indulging in a hot debate. This is going to be talking about policies, regulations, and acts, and our thoughts on this current administration.
All right, can you see me? Hello, I'm Trajan Jenkins. I'm Communications Director of VCU Young Dems. And I would like to say it's important to keep in mind while watching this debate about how impactful and serious these laws, policies, and regulations are. They will impact our lives or the lives of other Americans one way or another. We are here to push and bring back morals, logic, science, and empathy into our country. This is the first step of change and reform. Through climate change, policing reform, criminal justice reform, healthcare policies, and just a better economy. This nation we call home is in dire need of a systemic change. And with that change, we'll be brought into a period of prosperity for all Americans. I am proud to be a Black woman in a nation nicknamed the melting pot, a nation meant for anyone despite color, religion, sexual orientation, and identity. Trump's admin has failed to acknowledge the voices of millions who are striving to see change. So let's really bring about that change.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll turn to the college Republicans for your opening statements.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Hart. I'm actually the recruitment chair of VCU College Republicans. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight and witnessing this, I now know, historic event, the first one in history. And I'd like to talk about first about our own club's diversity. We are a coalition of not just conservative thinkers, we're a coalition of centrists, of moderates, and of libertarians. And you know, what kind of binds us all together is this idea that the Constitution is the single greatest work ever created by man. And we are all committed to the idea of preserving it. Ben Franklin said, when asked, you know, what government are we creating? He said, a republic, if we can keep it. If we can keep it. And we have seen that the modern Democrats are not very interested in keeping parts of the Constitution anymore. And that is something that we are categorically against. There's a lot of talk about abolishing the Electoral College, the very system that allows for minorities to have a voice in the United States, the very system that prevents Texas, California, and New York from determining the outcome of every single federal election. You know, they are willing to tear down they're willing to tear down our judicial system based off of petty party squabbling, instead of just rolling with the punches and understanding that now is not the right time to have a liberal judge. They're threatening to pack the court and undermine the judiciary in its entirety. But most of all, the biggest thing that we're worried about is that they are after our Second Amendment right to bear arms. Now, if you look at recent history, it's clear that governments, the first thing they do when they want to take away every single liberty you have is take away the one thing that you can use to protect it, and that is a firearm. When you look at instances of Nazi Germany, of Stalin's Russia, of Mao's China, and even of Maduro's and Chavez's Venezuela, the first thing they do is take away our guns. And we're not going to stand for that. We believe that the republic is something we ought to keep, and that there are flaws, but it is worth preserving. Thank you.
Okay, that time is up, and we thank you, both of you, for those opening statements. We'll now go ahead and get into the issues part of this. And this first question, the first subject area is going to be on COVID-19. And I'm going to put this one to the Republicans, first of all. Many Americans believe that the president has taken an aggressive, if not defensive, tone when answering charges about his management of the COVID-19 pandemic, which as of Friday had infected more than 8.4 million Americans and has killed 223,000. For example, he attacks the nation's top infectious disease expert and White House coronavirus task force member, Dr. Anthony Fauci, most recently calling him a disaster and an idiot. He makes fun of former President or former Vice President Biden for wearing masks when Mr. Trump has been reluctant himself to wear a mask in public or to urge others to do likewise. Overall, as the pandemic is showing alarming increases across the country, how does the president expect to inspire confidence that he is the one to lead the nation forward on this front? And you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Carrie, and I'm going to be taking this question. As college Republicans, we definitely believe that we definitely encourage the use of mask wearing. We know that the president has been a little lackluster, but we also are aware that the president, he kind of just does what he says, and he is going to do things his way. But we do want to make it clear that we do support mask wearing. As far as making the decisive decisions necessary, on January 31st, President Trump did declare it a public health emergency, and on March 13th, President Trump declared it a national emergency. These are both decisive measures that the president made while Democrats were out encouraging people to go to closely packed shops or to go out and see movies in theaters. As far as currently, we are leading the world nations in testing, which is definitely going to contribute to the fact that we do have a large number of cases. The next rival is going to be India, and I think there are about 39 million tests below from what we are producing. And we definitely think that the president's ability to help cut regulations, help to provide better access to medical equipment that had made it a little bit easier for us to be able to provide the states with the necessary medical equipment, and these regulation cuts have helped to ensure that fewer people have died from the pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much. Democrats. Vice President Biden has taken the opposite approach, saying that he will trust the expertise of infectious disease specialists like Dr. Fauci, and that he will urge Americans to wear masks. But Mr. Biden has not been clear about whether or not he will lock down the country because of COVID, which many of his critics say will cause more harm than good, especially with regard to the economy, but also increases in drug addiction and suicide and unnecessary delays in obtaining other kinds of health care. How can Americans feel confident that Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris will handle the pandemic well, given the lack of transparency, for instance, about lockdowns, and an apparent disinterest in the downsides of lockdowns? 2 minutes.
So I would like to start off by saying Trump did fail to give Americans the proper notice about the severity of this virus. Like you said, 8.4 million people, million Americans were infected with COVID-19. 223,000 died. That could be people's grandparents, grandmothers, people's kids. This affects all of us one way or another. Now, in regards to Biden, I believe that both of them are capable of combating against this virus. They have believed from the jump about wearing masks, and they also have put in a very thorough COVID regulations that they would like to implement. In regards to the lockdown, I do not think that he would put the lockdown over the entire country. Of course, there will be certain cities and states that will be under that lockdown. I think the lockdown is also very important because once we're able to combat against this COVID and have that vaccines in, those suicide rates will go down, the drug addictions, as well as our economy will boost back up. So it's really a chain reaction. We first combat against the COVID, and then we can go ahead and continue our lives.
Okay. Republicans, do you care to respond? You can have up to 1 minute if you have any response to that.
Yeah, I would be good to respond. So I think something that's very important to notice is that maybe we got to make sure that the cure isn't worse than the disease. You know, when you say about recovering financially from this, of course, the big businesses are going to be able to boost back from it. But there's hundreds, if not thousands, of small businesses that are out for good. People's livelihoods are on the line, you know? And the facts are that most people, if they get this disease, especially the younger folks, are not going to die from it. A lot of them won't even notice they have it. And we think that the notion of shutting down the entire economy is going to do way worse than, you know, being responsible, wearing your mask out in public, and opening up business slowly and with the proper regulations. We've seen that the damage has been astronomical to small business owners. And meanwhile, you know, it's...
Okay, that's a minute. Thank you. Democrats, do you care to respond? 1 minute.
Yes, I just wanted to make the point that when we're talking about COVID, we're talking about the communities that it's affecting here, y'all. We're talking about the brown and black, people of color, who are impacted mostly by this virus, okay? So when we're talking about lives are at stake, we can't paint the idea that, oh, people aren't necessarily dying, but we can recover from this. But we need to focus on prevention. We need to put focus on a cure, but we also need to place focus on relief. What does that look like for the communities who have already been affected by this virus? Okay, so when we talk about COVID, we have to talk about the rallies that Trump is still having in midst of a pandemic. We're talking about these large gatherings that the CDC has already argued against that are not safe, yet the president is still indulging in. To me, it's backwards to think that we can make fun of the vice president, a former vice president Biden, for wearing a mask while the president himself got COVID. It's very tragic. Okay,
thank you. Does anybody feel any need to keep going, or have we covered that one? Okay, unless somebody at this point indicates that, we'll move on. Let's talk for a moment about the subject of racial justice and police reform that we've heard a lot about. This one will go to the Democrats first. Calls from the Democratic Party's left wing to defund the police have dogged Vice President Biden during this campaign, even though he has maintained he does not support such a move. In fact, he has insisted police department budgets should be increased. How can Mr. Biden take that position and also convince voters that he supports meaningful police reform and accountability? 2 minutes.
When we're talking about police reforming, I think we need to look at it as reallocating those funds, opposed to defunding the funds or raising those funds. The police does not need tear gas, nor do they need rubber bullets in order to control a peaceful assembly. Now we can talk on the racial justice impact. So when it comes to racial justice, it's 96 to 98% of these protests are non-violent at all. So I think we need to take that into account, as well as when it comes with the policing, we realize that they have incited a lot of those protests in which it became violent. Now, with policing, when I said reallocate those funds, I think we should reallocate those funds to bringing social workers, psychologists within those departments. That way that they have that acknowledgement and that knowledge in order to combat against these mental. Elijah McClain would still be alive right now if those police officers had psychologists with them. I think those funds should also go towards community building programs. That way everybody in the community is able to be close with their police officers and trust them. I think it's very important that we trust our police officers, especially when it comes to policing reform, because we lack that trust with them. I also think it's very important we talk about where policing originated. Policing originated through slave patrols, in which they would kidnap or take slaves who were running away and bring them back to their plantation, kill or murder them. And then later on in the 1800s, the North in Boston created a modern police department in order to combat against immigrants. So we also need to really think about how policing started and how we can reform that into a positive connotation, especially in modern times.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we'll turn on that same topic to our Republican representatives here. President Trump, of course, calls himself the law and order president, taking a hard line, including using the military against peaceful protesters. While the nation debates questions around systemic racism and police brutality, he has also tried to tie Vice President Biden and other Democrats to the violence that has occasionally broken out in the midst of nationwide protests led by the Black Lives Matter social movement, which he repeatedly attacked. Are the president's critics correct that his combative, hardline approach will only aggravate our racial justice problems? You have 2 minutes.
So I'll take this question. I'm currently the vice chair of VCU College Republicans, and I think it should be understood that there is a delineation to make between those who are peacefully protesting and those who are, for lack of a better phrase, rioting. And when these peaceful protests devolve into riots, that is when law and order needs to be taken place. It is obviously VCU College Republicans, we stand with peaceful protesters, and we understand how incidences like with what happened with George Floyd, obviously, are just absolutely heinous. And we don't stand with that at all. But we also do not stand with the rioting that takes place in some of these, a lot of Democrat-led cities. And we also are proponents of, when it comes to police reform, instead of defunding the police, which we do understand can also mean reallocating funds, we're also proponents of, as the VCU Young Dems have neglected to bring up so far, is the removal of police unions And these police unions are the entities that are protecting these bad cops like Chauvin, who obviously was a repeated offender. And if we can work together to go through these 650 police union contracts that repeatedly protect these bad cops, then perhaps that's one of the better steps, one of the more practical steps to police reform.
Okay, thank you very much. Democrats, do you have a response? You can have up to 1 minute for a response to what you just heard from the Republicans.
Yeah, I'd love to respond. So when Richmond protesters were peacefully protesting on Monument Avenue, when we were exercising our First Amendment rights and got tear gassed 30 minutes before curfew, are you saying that was fair, that was just, that was on the protesters? Police are out of control the way they are treating these protesters. I'm not saying all cops are bad. However, they've clearly gone out of control and have taken over way more power than they should. There is no reason for police to have military-grade weapons. Anything that would be happening on the street of an American city right now is a war crime in a third world country. Why is it okay for it to happen to American citizens? It's not right and it's not fair. We would like to also add and reiterate the fact that it's 96 to 98% of the Black Lives Matter protests are peaceful.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I was muted, I think. Republicans, would you care to respond to what you just heard from the Democrats? You can have up to 1 minute.
Yeah, I think I'll start the response, and of course, Josh and Carrie can jump in after. But the only thing I would like to say right now is that the Black Lives Matter movement, in my opinion, and I think in most of CR's opinion, its start is a lot different than what it is now. We believe that what it is now is an organization that is pushing a narrative that is only making our country more divisive than it really should be. There are obviously a lot of things going on with COVID, a lot of things with the election, obviously, and tensions are very high. So for an organization to be like Black Lives Matter and to try to promote racial justice, but actively combat that kind of injustice with just more violence is just not the way.
And I think I'd also like to point out that, 96%, that's great. And, power to them for doing that. But the good behavior of the majority does not cancel out the heinous behavior of a minority. And, they are doing a disservice to your cause, to the cause we're all behind, really, to police reform, because they are making the 96% look like the rioters. And we don't think that's fair. And we think those who are rioting need to be punished to the fullest extent of the law.
Okay, time is up. Thank you. Anybody else need a response to that particular? You'd like to go again, Democrats? You can just 30 seconds now at this point, okay?
Okay. Trump's rhetoric alone has made this country divisive and not the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement is an organization and not a movement, despite the name. They do come up with several protests, and need I say it again, most of these protests, 96 to 98% are peaceful. And also, Trump has lacked the need to condone white supremacy. Well, white supremacy is one of the #1 terrorists in this nation.
Okay, thank you very much. Republicans, you have a response?
I'll take this. President Trump has condoned white supremacy on multiple occasions. Kayleigh McEnany has gone through dates and times when he has, including in the first debate where he said sure, and then after Joe Biden gave him a name, President Trump did, in a not very strong manner, but in a very President Trump manner, asked that the Proud Boys do stop. He did his best to denounce them. And I would also like to point out that Joe Biden has also been adding fuel to these flames of division in 2012.
We've got to stop it right there, okay? Let's move on at this point. And now we're going to turn to healthcare policy. And the Republicans, this one's for you. President Trump set out what he called a vision for healthcare in the U.S. more than a month ago, including executive orders that he said would protect Americans with pre-existing conditions and to prevent surprise medical billing. But he has not come forward with a comprehensive medical care proposal to replace the Affordable Care Act, which he continues to oppose. Indeed, about a week after the election, the Supreme Court will hear a case brought by the Trump administration, which would gut the ACA, including its pre-existing conditions protections. About 20 million Americans would lose their health care coverage. How can voters feel confident the president can address our continuing health care issues without detailing a plan to deal with them, and with an active effort to gut the ACA's pre-existing conditions protections? 2 minutes.
So I'll start the response on this one. Although Trump hasn't necessarily provided a comprehensive plan, he has taken some steps. Not only has he taken steps to sort of remove the Affordable Care Act because of although it may say that it will insure most Americans, we do see that a lot of Americans, because of these rising drug prices and premiums of the insurance companies that they're covered by, they're beginning to be uninsured because the prices are just heinous for them to cover. For example, let's see if I can find, for example, when a 60-year-old couple in Grand Island, Nebraska, making $70,000 a year, which is just slightly too much to qualify for the Obamacare's premium subsidy, is faced with paying $38,000, which is over half of their yearly income, obviously, to buy this silver plan, which is a part of ACA, with an annual $11,100 annual maximum out-of-pocket limit. We shouldn't be surprised if they would make the tough decision to drop the coverage. I mean, it's just too costly. Not only that, some of the steps that Trump has taken would be some of these state innovation waivers that allow states to implement innovative ways to provide access to quality healthcare that's at least as comprehensive as the ACA, but without all of the increased costs and not increasing the federal deficit as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on now to the Democrats. On the same subject, if the president has the challenge of running for re-election without a clearly defined healthcare plan, then Vice President Biden has the challenge of making the healthcare exchanges under the Affordable Care Act more affordable. And his healthcare plan would create a so-called public option similar to Medicare that people could purchase. Mr. Biden's critics say the plan is nothing more than a big step toward expensive, inefficient, and ineffective socialized medicine. With low quality care, long waits for specialists, disincentives to innovate, and a reduction in Americans' freedom to make a life or death choice. Why should we believe that after all these years, Mr. Biden has a government health care plan that will work? 2 minutes.
Donald Trump has been in office for 4 years. We are in the midst of a global pandemic, and yet he has not been bothered to release a comprehensive healthcare plan. He currently does not qualify for healthcare under whatever he has created. It's not a system that is viable or will continue to work. 2 million people are now going to have a pre-existing condition. So what we have is not a system that will work. Joe Biden has a plan. ACA, of course, has its flaws, but it is a workable system that, when built upon and edited and changed to shift to the times, it is a perfectly functional system. And like I said, it is better than not having a plan. A bunch of do-nothing executive orders are not healthcare policy. It is just that, nothing.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have one more who wants to add on.
I'm sorry?
We have one more that would like to add on.
Okay,
No?
quickly.
No, it's fine, sorry.
Nobody? Okay. All right. What I'm going to, first of all, before we move on, I want to suggest to the audience members that if you have a question, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to put a question in if you have one that you want to hear answered. I also want to, just to keep this moving along, if anybody wants to respond further, I'll say raise your hand during the previous argument, and I will, and then you'll be able to have a response. Otherwise, we'll move on to another area. Republicans, do you have a response to what you just heard about the healthcare plan?
Yes, and it's a small response, but it's just a question. So you had said, or VCU Young Dems, you had said that when built upon, the ACA can be better, or with changes made. What changes exactly if the drug prices and premiums, and especially since advocates for HIV and AIDS patients have filed complaints against a number of Florida health plans, arguing that prescription drug benefits have been structured in a manner that discriminates against these vulnerable patients? What sort of changes exactly are you referring to?
Like to respond, Democrats?
So basically the changes that we're not referring to are the ones that Trump basically reversed. We're not talking about reversing the individual mandate that the ACA had prior. That's something that we need right now for pre-existing conditions. Like Haley said, 2 million Americans currently have pre-existing conditions. And when you talk about the loss of private health care or the failing of it, we also have to acknowledge that 15 million Americans lost their private sponsored health insurance, all right? And 55 million Americans are in poverty right now. So there are definitely improvements that need to be made, but reversing its individual mandate is not one of them, which Trump did.
Okay. All right, thank you. We have nothing else on that. Let's move on now to, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just one thing about the individual mandate. I think that probably the greatest thing he did to the ACA is remove the individual mandate. It's a ridiculous notion to the concept of liberty that someone should be required to buy something under threat of monetary loss if they don't. I mean, it's a ridiculous notion to pay for something that you don't want, you know? If you want to make a public option, that's a different story. But if you're going to force people to buy health insurance when they don't want to, I mean, it's just a ridiculous concept. And it's probably the greatest thing, you know, he's done for healthcare is removing the individual mandate.
Okay. Thank you. We move on. All right, moving on now to the economic crisis and recovery topic, and this one is for the Democrats. The COVID-19 crisis has led to the worst economic catastrophe in the United States since the Great Depression. Vice President Biden has made a consistent theme of his campaign to bring back the middle class. He has also criticized the Trump tax cuts and supports an increase in the minimum hourly wage. In view of the pressure to bring the economy back as quickly as possible, what should be the priorities of a Biden administration when it comes to economic recovery? 2 minutes.
So basically, when we're talking about the economy, we have to focus on small businesses, but we also need to focus on those who are profiting off of the economy currently. We're talking about big pharma, we're talking about large corporations like Amazon that currently pay $0 in tax money. That, to me, is crazy. Also, we need to talk about taxing the rich. We're talking about an economy that is built upon the working class. And if that very working class isn't healthy enough, isn't prospering on their own, then technically we do have a failing economy as we do right now. President Trump loves to say that our economy is doing wonderful right now. However, that is just simply not true. We have a large amount of small businesses that have already closed, which is because mainly the pandemic too, but also there comes that portion of relief in a pandemic, which we fail to acknowledge right now.
Okay, thank you. Next one is for the Republicans on the same topic of economic crisis and recovery. 7 months ago tomorrow, President Trump signed the largest emergency aid package in U.S. history, a bipartisan effort that went to his desk from both Democrats and Republicans in Congress. Today, when the economy continues to struggle and many business owners are pleading with the government for more aid, Republicans are resisting calls for the aid package on the scale Democrats proposed. What is the Republican answer going forward for getting America back on its feet? 2 minutes.
Well, we definitely believe that we need to be able to pass comprehensive relief to help those that are struggling. And Republicans do support passing relief efforts to help those that are struggling. Munchin, the Treasury Secretary, I have a hard time with his name for some reason. He has offered Democrats an olive branch by doing the unemployment insurance at $400 a week. And Nancy Pelosi in particular is not okay with dropping the state and local bailout that is only going to serve as a means of bailing out poorly run blue cities that have failed to manage their budgets properly before the pandemic, and it's not the responsibility of the taxpayers to bail out those states and governments. In addition, the tax cuts that President Trump did pass have affected everybody in a positive aspect. Most people feel like they have not received a tax break because most of it resulted in small increments from the payroll tax. So throughout the year, your paychecks were a few dollars larger.
Okay, thank you. Is there any kind of response on the part of the Democrats to that, or you want to move on?
There's a response. 6 months. We've been in a pandemic for 6 months. You expect the average American household to have somehow survived on $2,400 in those 6 months. We have healthcare costs, we have unemployment, people still have to feed their families. We have people who aren't getting food from their schools anymore. $2,400 isn't enough for people to survive. And instead of actually trying to play ball, we have a Republican in both the House, in both Senate and office who refuse to play ball. Why is pushing through a Supreme Court justice more important than helping Americans right now? People need to eat. People have to pay rent. People need money. People need help. But I guess we need a Supreme Court justice more than we need to survive. Apparently, at least if you are a Republican in office right now.
Okay. Republicans, do you have anything you want to add to that? Okay.
I also wanted to add, according to ACU, there's nearly...
We've finished 1 minute, so that I'm now turning to the Republicans if they have a response.
So what you said in your opening statement is very true. We do want to help the middle class, and that is something that President Trump has done. And to think that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, more than doubling the current wage, is going to help small businesses is an utter disaster. I mean, they're already under the most economic stress since the Great Depression. They don't have enough money to be handing out doubling the wages of people right now. And, you know, they don't really have it in the future. It's just going to raise inflation. And second off, I just like to point out that structurally, there's no reason why you can't pass a Supreme Court justice and pass COVID relief bills in the same time. But it's because of Democrats like our own Senator Mark Warner, who don't want to pass COVID relief, voting against COVID relief, that we are not getting the funds to the people who need them most.
Okay. We're ready to move on to another topic. The next topic is election integrity.
We would like to respond, sorry.
All right, okay. You get 30 seconds.
If we were to raise the minimum wage to the inflation in which it's at now, it would actually be $21. I would also like to add the fact that with Trump's administration and his lack of good leadership during this pandemic, there is 10 million jobs lost, and that's the least amount of jobs that we've lost since 2008-2009 recession. So the fact that we have lost that many jobs compared to that recession during his administration is truly a problem. It really shows how he is not a good leader, not fit to be president, and he is not doing too much for the economy at all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you got another response?
Yes. I would just like to say that not only is increasing the minimum wage a problem, but also a sort of a tax increase as well. If you look at cities like Seattle, their increasing tax plans are only making it harder for them to pay their workers. As you say, VCU Dems, you guys are saying that, now is more of a time as any than to for people to live and to sort of provide for their families and things like that. But they can't provide for their families if they're being laid off because the businesses can't handle tax increases. Next year in 2021, many businesses are at risk of incurring a 700% increase in unemployment taxes to help replenish the unemployment funds of the city of Seattle. So
Okay.
what do you say to something like that?
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on now to election integrity. And this is a question about election integrity for both sides. We'll go ahead and start with the Republicans since Democrats started on the last one. For months, President Trump has claimed that the election results will be tainted by widespread voting fraud, especially because of alleged problems with mail-in ballots. However, systematic research, including by the administration's own Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, routinely shows very little voting fraud in American elections. Why do you believe the president continues to make claims despite the evidence? And to what extent do you believe his efforts have delegitimized our voting system? So let's go first to the Republicans again.
Well, first of all, historically, there hasn't been that much recorded voter fraud, but as said by one of the federal election reform councilmen and also a committee run by former President Jimmy Carter, that the electoral system can't actually inspire like a public safeguard against voter fraud. It's extremely hard to detect, and it's basically tantamount to littering. It's almost impossible to detect. So, just because there's not a lot of people on record doing it doesn't mean that a lot of people aren't doing it. Second off, mail-in balloting is just one piece of the puzzle that is making this election so contentious and how it's not that well put together. Our state alone has reversed a voter ID law. You no longer need a voter ID. You just need to come in on your honor and say your address and your name. And, everyone's address and their name is public information. You could commit as much voting fraud as you want to with relative ease. And a lot of people say that ID laws are somehow discriminatory, but the National Bureau of Economic Research found that between 2008 and 2016, ID laws had no negative effect on registration or turnout for any specified group defined by race, gender, age, or party affiliation. And beyond that, there's more than just, contentious things going on this election. I mean, the Democratic backsliding is obvious. I mean, Joe Biden is basically advocating to pack the Supreme Court because of partisan politics. And that is something that we cannot deal with. We've seen in Venezuela, the court went from 10 to 20 to 32, and it's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. Okay.
Same question to you, Democrats. Would you like to answer the election integrity question?
Yes. I don't know where you got the idea that you do not need an ID to vote in Virginia. I'm looking at virginiaelections.gov, and it says that you do need an ID to show up at a polling place. As for voter fraud, we can debate on and on about this imaginary concept that you do not have facts to back up, or we can talk about the actual real voter intimidation happening by Trump supporters that we see every single day at early voting polling places. There was a video 2 days ago in New York City of a police officer in uniform in his police car shouting Trump 2020 over the loudspeakers. You are an elected official, you are not an elected official, you're a state employee, you can't do that. Election mirroring, voter intimidation, these are the real issues with voting right now. These are the actual tangible issues that we are facing, and pretending and hiding behind this imaginary concept of voter fraud is not going to fix anything. It is a scare tactic. It is nothing more than that.
Okay. Josh, okay, for the Republicans?
I would just like to inform everyone that as of the 2019 session in the House of Delegates here in Virginia, they confirmed a law. I don't remember the bill number, but I worked there, so I'm very familiar with the bill that does not require you to need an ID to vote. You do not need one. If you don't believe me, you can go in there without your ID. They'll give you a form. You write down your address, and they'll give you a ballot. Also, voting fraud is not a myth. In 2018 alone, there are 35,000 people who have voted twice, whether that be twice from the same address or twice from 2 different addresses. And that may seem like a small number, but those are the numbers that change elections. Every single vote counts. And when some people are rigging the system to have an unfair advantage and to take 2 votes, we are tarnishing the entire idea of democracy.
Okay. Did you wish to add anything, Democrats? Okay.
I would like to bring back to the point in which he mentioned the Supreme Court justice. I think that that is simply not a good idea. I think with the Supreme Court and in which him picking Amy Barrett, I think him picking her is definitely a political scam, a political sort of game for him. And I think it's very important that we have to realize who these justices are. They're appointed justices by the president, as well as they're there for life. So it's not really fun and games when a sitting president thinks that it is okay to elect someone simply because of their political views. I don't think that is right. In court packing, Joe Biden does not support court packing, but he said that he does not know if he would do it or not. So that's still an argument that's up in the air.
Okay. All right, 30 seconds. Carrie?
Thank you. If Joe Biden does not support court packing, then he should be able to say without a doubt, not we'll see what happens, not we'll see what he'll do. He should say that he is against it. He shouldn't be waiting until after the election. He should be saying it now. In addition, the president has the right to pick a justice, and only twice ever before in American history, when the 2 parties in the Senate and the presidency are the same, has the justice not been confirmed. Historically speaking, it would be more unprecedented for Amy Coney Barrett not to be confirmed.
Okay.
I would just like to add this.
That's enough for our, you've used up your time, but Democrats, did you have a 30-second response?
Yes. I just wanted to add a couple of facts that Trump has also had 3 picks. And I also do want to add the fact that, again, this is a political scam, him adding Amy to this ballot. I don't think that is right at all. And in regards to you mentioning how court packing and he needs to, make up his mind and blatantly say it, I think we should also press Trump about that with his healthcare policies and definitely any other policies that he's iffy on. We can't keep saying, Joe needs to do this when Trump needs to do the same thing as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, let's move on to foreign policy now. And we'll start with the Democrats. What concrete steps can Democrats take that would put our international relations, particularly when it comes to coin a phrase, troublemaker states, on a more secure footing that would actually make the world a safer place? After all, former Vice President Biden's critics say that many of our current problems date to the Obama administration's failed foreign policy, the failure to punish Syria for crossing the red line, which created a vacuum that Russia and Iran filled, the hasty withdrawal of Iraq, which created a vacuum that ISIS filled, the inability to slow North Korea's nuclear program, and the Iran deal, which had a great number of loopholes and other problems that the Iranians were bound to make progress on nuclear weapons right under our noses. 2 minutes for that. What concrete steps can Democrats take?
Well, I just wanted to make the point, when we're talking about foreign policy, we also have to acknowledge the idea that maybe sometimes the United States needs to use a more hands-off approach. We've been more than happy to rush into any other country, whether it's the Middle East, not saying it's a country, but it's an area, and now it's in complete turmoil, but making the point that maybe we shouldn't be so involved in what other people are doing. Maybe the leaders in other countries know what's best for those countries. And I'm not talking about the dictators leading those countries. I'm talking about the true progressive leaders that maybe know what's best because they've lived there for so long, the experts living there. But we also need to talk about, like you mentioned, Iran. I'm an Iranian immigrant myself, and I have seen the drastic impacts that sanctions have on the lives abroad. When we think about sanctions, we think about, oh, this is just us committing a diplomatic, untie, I guess you could say. We're cutting ourselves from this area and making it harder for them to get the resources and the means that they so desire or need. Not even a desire, not even a want, but to survive. And so when we look at it in terms of Iran, we see these sanctions hurting only the people and not necessarily the head top rulers, right? So we're stopping people from getting the necessary medicine, insulin, things that they need to survive.
Okay, thank you. Republicans, turning to you on that same foreign policy issue. When it comes to our primary adversaries on the international scene, as we just talked about, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, what kind of real progress can President Trump point to that makes the world safer and more secure? After all, the president's critics say North Korea still has its nuclear arsenal and has just announced a new ICBM, which is intercontinental ballistic missile program, which can reach deep into the U.S. Iran is free to develop its own nuclear program again because the president pulled out of the multilateral treaty we had with Iran. China is stronger than ever, and Russia has been emboldened to act aggressively around the world, while President Trump has sided with President Putin on a range of issues.
I'd actually like to open up with echoing an idea that the College Dem proposed, that maybe we should back off the international stage a little bit. And that's something that Trump has done an excellent job at. He's taken our troops, reduced our influence in the Middle East. As far as the North Korea issue goes, they'd still have a nuclear arsenal. When it comes down to it, it's very hard to get a maniac to release his nuclear arms. But you know what? It's very challenging also to get him to go across the border and shake hands with a man he has had a blood feud with longer than he's been alive. And that's something that Trump has been able to do. He's been able to get the Israelis and the surrounding countries to sign the historic Abraham Accords. He's been nominated for not one, not two, but 3 Nobel Peace Prizes for his diplomatic skills in reducing world tension. And that's something that we have to acknowledge. And as far as the Iran nuclear deal, that was a horrible deal to get into in the first place. It was clear from the beginning that they weren't following protocol. They were importing way more heavy water than they needed to run any nuclear power plants. They were enriching more uranium a year after the deal was made. And they allowed, nonpartisan agents into their facilities, but they told them where the facilities were. If they really wanted to make a bomb, they could have made a bomb anywhere. We were losing money in the deal, and it's something we need to back out of. Trump has made sure that our alliances are paying their fair share for the protection they get from the United States. He's made sure that Germany is paying equal parts in NATO for us, and the other countries are contributing more. Overall, his doctrine of America First has done wonders for our economy, for our security, and for our spending.
Okay, thank you. Democrats, do you have anything to add to this?
Keep echoing what you guys both agreed on. I do think that America should fix American problems first. There is no reason for us to be in Palestine right now trying to make a deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. There's no reason for us to be allies with Israel. There is no reason for us to be involved in the Middle East. We have enough issues here. We should not be trying to play world savior absolutely everywhere. It doesn't work. How many of these terrorist organizations in the Middle East started because of a CIA-backed move? It doesn't work. There's no reason for us to continue pretending that we are doing something helpful in the name of national security when it is only continuously shown that it fails.
Okay, and Republicans, anything to add? All right, let's move on. The last actual major category we have here before we go to a couple of audience questions is on the subject of climate change, okay? And we're going to start with the Republicans on this one. Here we have, with climate change, one of the clearest distinctions between the candidates. President Trump has said climate change is a hoax. He has called those who disagree with that view prophets of doom. He's rolled back regulations designed to deal with global warming and has moved to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change. Given that climate scientists are almost completely united in their view that man-made factors are responsible for virtually all of the climate change over the past half century, what reason do we have to believe that a second Trump administration will work to address that issue? 2 minutes.
Well, I think we see a very clear idea of conservatism here is that maybe some issues the government doesn't need to solve, and they will solve themselves. And that's been proven that we are solving the issue of climate change without help from the international community and without help from the government. The private sector is doing a wonderful job. So first of all, the Paris Climate Accords, members of the Accords, almost 2/3 of the people in it say it's impractical. There's no real effects it's had. Simply, it's an agreement to meet certain deadlines, and we have to pay for it. You know, we removed ourselves from it and saved trillions of dollars in the process. And also, we are still on track, actually ahead of track, to reduce our CO2 emissions. We said that we'd reduce it by 24% by 2025, and we're almost at 19%. Right now, our CO2 emissions are lower than the lowest since 1992. And the CO2 emissions per capita is lower than it was in the 50s. As far as national greenhouse gases go, our greenhouse gas output has fallen 10% at the same time that the economy has grown 25%. You know, we've seen a recent turn down in coal, and that's not because of government regulations. That's because the innovations inspired by capitalism are making wind and solar more financially sound than coal. Wind price decreased by 70% and solar prices decreased by nearly 90%. So when you can pay less for a kilowatt hour of green energy, everyone's going to do it. And, you know, even marketable options to the common people like electric cars. In between 2018 and 2019 alone, the price of an electric car dropped 13%. We are making strides to make our place livable.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Democrats on the same topic. Joe Biden has criticized the president as a climate arsonist and embraced a $2 trillion plan to both develop clean energy and to reduce emissions. But he also faces strong pressure from the Democratic liberal base to embrace a more radical Green New Deal that has been highly criticized by Republicans as too radical and one that could in fact bankrupt the country. And Republicans say that despite his denials, Biden will move to ban fracking. How can a President Biden navigate his way through all that? 2 minutes.
All right, well, I just wanted to start off by making the point that the Green New Deal is nothing terrible. This is something that we should have adopted a while ago because guess what? Climate change will not reverse on its own, okay? Despite what you might hear about maybe some Republicans encompassing the view that, oh, it's just the world, it'll recover on its own. No, it's come to a point where we cannot neglect to ignore this circumstance because guess what? It's going to affect us and it's going to affect our children for generations to come. No, it's not a hoax by the Chinese, despite what President Trump might think. Climate change is in dire need of some reform right now, which President Trump has not done within the past 4 years. Instead, he pulled us out of the Paris Agreement, right? And sure, you can say that there's a lot of good and bad things on both sides. However, a majority good. It's a good agreement that we want to stay in. Why are we one of the only more developed countries that pulled out? To me, it's backwards. But also, we have to understand that we need water and clean air for our future generations, but also for us living now, for Americans that are getting a bunch of pollution in the more populated cities that, like Flint, don't have clean water.
Okay. All right, do you wish to respond, Republicans?
Yes.
Okay.
So as far as the US goes, we have made a sustainable investment in the Trump administration to go to green energy. Our investment rose 28%, and we've seen really good profits from that. I mean, we're here to save our world, No one here is denying that climate change is real, but what we're saying is that the market can solve the problem because there is a market, Producers can't sell anything to anyone if there's no one to sell it to. They don't want to destroy the world. They want to save the world too. And they are constantly pioneering new ways to make green energy more affordable. Like I said earlier, the price of coal, a kilowatt hour of coal is now higher than a price of kilowatt hour for both solar and wind. So you're going to see in the next few years a lot more solar plants and a lot more wind plants. And I think also something that we can agree maybe across party lines is that we need to invest in nuclear energy. It's the cleanest energy in the world.
Thank you. You care to say anything, Democrats?
I think we really need to focus on Joe Biden really wants to bring in that clean energy, that clean climate, some real climate change reform. Need I say, if President Trump really cared about the climate, he would not have reduced the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, a 26% cut in their funds. That could have helped the California wildfires. Today, on October 26, 2020, there was 27 new wildfires in California where there were 4,000 firefighters on the front line who was combating against that. If we had those funds within the EPA, we maybe could have stopped it or had more funds to go ahead and combat against this wildfire. And that's only one example of how climate change is affecting us now.
Okay. Thank you. And let's move on now to the audience question portion of this. We're going over time a little bit, but we're having a good discussion here, and I really appreciate that everybody's participating so well in this debate. In this case, I'm going to just pose questions directly to one side or the other, and you can answer it as briefly as you feel you can. No more than 2 minutes, though, in any case. I'm going to direct the first one. Let's see, we did the last one to the Republicans first, so let's do this for the Democrats. Joe Biden wrote the '94 crime bill, which put thousands of young black men, mostly, in jail. Joe Biden claims he wants to change this. Why didn't he do it under the Obama administration? He had 8 years to do so and failed to. So how can we trust Joe to do things when he can't even get the bill he wrote overturned?
It was the '94 crime bill that Joe did implement on third. Need I say Bernie Sanders also sponsored it and supported it. Now with that crime bill, he couldn't really do too much within the Obama administration within those 8 years because, for one, he is vice president. He does not have those mandates. He cannot do the things that President Obama could do. So we cannot say, hey, why didn't Joe fix all criminal justice reform at the time when he does not have that power? During Obama's administration, a lot of Congress disagreed with him. They would block a lot of his bills and policies to get further passed on. So now with Joe wanting to be president, he actually has this power to go ahead and push through with this criminal justice reform plan. Some of those implications would be ending cash money bail, non-violent drug charges, as well as decriminalizing marijuana and eventually making it legal. So I think that this is all things that we need to take in consideration opposed to that '94 crime bill. It was definitely something that messed up the Black community, the minority community, people of color. But I think now we need to go ahead and look at a more reformative approach. And I think Kamala Harris and Vice President Joe Biden is definitely those who can go ahead and get that through, especially since there's a lot of people in Congress today who support them, who are saying that they're going to go ahead and push that bill through. So definitely we should take that into consideration and vote for Joe.
Okay, next question from the audience is directed to the Republicans. In your opening statement, you claimed the Constitution was the greatest. Do you acknowledge that the text of Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 labels other persons, meaning slaves, be counted as 3/5 of a person? This document that you hold in such high regard also has been amended 27 times in its history, including the Second Amendment, which you also mentioned in your opening statement. Do you still agree with that opening statement and what you said about the Constitution being the greatest?
Yes, and here's why. Because the Constitution accounts for the fact that it will make mistakes. You know, there are numerous things in the Constitution. We can point out 100 things. I mean, slavery, women weren't allowed to vote. I mean, things that today are so obviously wrong to us weren't wrong in our ancestors' eyes. But that's something that they foresaw and something that they put in implementation to correct. So like you said, there's been 27 amendments, and every one has been a step to make our Constitution a better document. And that's what makes it so great, is that it is self-correcting.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to go on to, we're not going to have responses for these. We're just going to have another question. Again, for the Democrats. Why is Biden in favor of an assault weapon ban when most murders in the U.S. are committed using handguns? For reference, in 2016, the homicides by firearm, and I'm using the questioner's figures here, 65% or 7,105 were committed with handguns, 3.4% with rifles, 2.4% and 1.6% with other guns per the FBI data. So the question is why the former vice president would be in favor of an assault weapons ban.
I would also like to touch on something that was mentioned in your opening statements. You said very obviously it's impossible for Democrats to be pro-gun. I'm very pro the Second Amendment. I know plenty of members on e-board who are Second Amendment supporters. So I would appreciate that correction in the future. But also, banning assault weapons, A, is unconstitutional. Nobody on this board will support that. Nobody would support that here. But it's fear. People are afraid. There is no real gun control happening. So of course they're going to say, let's just get rid of the guns. You want people to stop calling for gun control. You want people to stop calling for assault weapons ban, bump stop ban. You want people to stop doing that. Come up with real legislation. Ignoring the problem that doesn't happen in any other civilized nation in the world is not a solution. We cannot continue to say it'll go away eventually. It's a loophole. It's a one-time thing. That's not true. We have a problem. It's not the guns. It's a society issue that we need to make legislation that's going to fix it. Until we have actual mental health care legislation, until we have these checks in place, of course people are going to want to get rid of guns. If you don't want people to say that they're going to come take your guns, nip the problem in the bud.
Okay. And look, we're going to have one more question, this one directed to the Republicans before we go on to our closing statements. This one is on the subject of voter repression, or voter suppression, rather. Could we talk about the efforts by the GOP to suppress minority, youth, elderly, and student voters through actions such as voter ID law modification and voter roll purges?
So if you're on the topic of voter roll purges, that is something that states will do regularly. Referring back to the 2018 gubernatorial race within Georgia, the vast majority of those people that were purged from the voter roll, they had various inaccuracies, mostly like improperly named. Those people might have been moved, they might have deceased, they have just other inaccuracies within their voting registration that would have caused them to be kicked out of the voting system. And another thing is that elections are highly localized, and every time that we see these videos, most of these counties are more left-leaning counties. They are the ones that are mainly responsible for making sure that voters can have easy access to the polls. And sometimes when you, for example, in large cities, it's really hard to have just easy, it's hard for lines to be shorter because there's just a huge number of people within such a small area that need to be able to vote in the same place.
Quickly, Isaiah?
Yes, and also to add on to that, we as CRs also believe that it is a farce that sorry if there's a siren in the background, that is a farce that the Democrats are pushing this narrative that certain minority groups have a harder time getting IDs or don't have IDs. Generally speaking, most people do have IDs, especially minority groups. So the narrative that's being pushed about suppressing minority, I guess suppressing the vote in minority groups is, again, only dividing the country further.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And let's go ahead and move on now to our 2-minute closing statement for each side. We've had a really, really spirited discussion here, and I appreciate it. We started off with the Democrats with the opening statement, so let's go first to the college Republicans for our closing statement. 2 minutes.
Yes. So for the closing statement, in closing, we would just like to say that VCU CRs, we stand for certain ideals like financial responsibility, obviously patriotism, but also taking care of our individual rights as Americans. And we do believe that the radical left is starting to have a sort of pushback that is trying to take these ideals away from us. And so thinking about things like protecting our Second Amendment rights, thinking about things like also being able to have that freedom of speech and being a peaceful protester and standing for what you believe in, but also not infringing on certain things like the financial stability or the structural stability of your own cities are the things that we believe.
Okay. Now moving on to the Democrats for your closing statement.
VCU Young Democrats really believes that America has seen 4 years of incompetent leadership from the current administration. We're in the midst of an uncontrolled pandemic. Healthcare costs are rising. There's civil unrest happening in cities across the nation, and the gap between the poorest and wealthiest citizens has never been wider. We firmly believe that people deserve better. Our citizens deserve better. When you cast your ballots next week for all of the viewers, we just really hope that you remember you're not just voting for yourself. You are voting for America's poorest. You're voting for America's most vulnerable. You're voting for America's youngest. You are voting for the next generation. So we hope that you're going to join us in voting for Biden and Harris. We hope that you will help us bring this country back into some sense of semblance. We are hoping that you will help us give this country better like it deserves.
Okay, well, I just want to start off by our closing by thanking all of our students tonight who did such a fantastic job of preparation, delivery, and of reminding us all that civility can still be a part of political debate in this country. So I want to thank you by name, Carrie Flynn, Isaiah Hicks, Josh Hart, Haley Lease, Atusa Hagani, and T. Jenkins. You all just did a real credit to, I think, the student body. And frankly, I wish that the actual candidates would take a lesson from you in how to debate in a civil manner. I also want to thank again Dean Mallett of the College of Humanities and Sciences. We hope that tonight's debate has helped illuminate the issues for our audience. And please, if you have not yet voted, please make sure to do so. And we'll start finding out the results just 1 week from tomorrow. I'm Bill Oglesby. Thank you for joining us. Good night.